Welcome back to the Literary Lori YouTube channel. I'm Literary Lori, and I can't believe it's been 25 years since my co-author Ayana Bird and I decided that we were going to write the definitive book that answered the question, why is black hair such a big deal? Why, when black people walk outside of their front door every day in the United States, do they have to decide how they're going to wear their hair so that they don't get fired from their job, so that they get hired for the job they might be interviewing for? Maybe they're younger and they have to decide, will this hairstyle get me kicked out of school today? Or will this hairstyle make white people want to put their hands in my hair? We wanted to write the book that explained all of those questions, not to mention, who's making all of that money from what is supposedly a billion-dollar industry? So that's what we decided to do. That's what we did when we wrote the book, Hair Story, Untangling the Roots of Black Hair in America, that came out 25 years ago in 2001. So the question is, why? Literally a few days ago was I contacted by CNN to ask me if black hair was still a big deal in 2026, and if so, why? So this video is meant to answer that exact question. Is black hair still a big deal in 2026? Let's get into it. So welcome back to the Literary Lori YouTube channel. My name is Lori L. Tharps. I am a traditionally published author of mostly nonfiction, but I moved to the south of Spain so that I could relaunch my career as a full-time novelist. But this video is about black hair, and it's about my book that I co-wrote called Hair Story, Untangling the Roots of Black Hair in America, but specifically not so much about the book as it is about that question, is black hair still a big deal in 2026? And if so, why? And the answer, you don't have to wait till the end of the video. The answer is yes. Yes, it is still a big deal in 2026. So, like I said, my co-author Ayana Bird and I, we knew way back in the 1990s that there was something about black hair that needed a book to answer. This wasn't just something that we could do as an article in a magazine or newspaper. At the time, we were young journalists, but we knew this was a book. Both of us had written I wrote my master's thesis in graduate school. She wrote her undergraduate thesis on this topic of the history and the culture and the politics of black hair and why it was so significant in the United States. So we decided to take that original research that we had both done in university and turn it into a book, because there was even more that needed to be said. There had not been written a definitive exploration of black hair from 15th century Africa. In other words, pre-European contact. Like, what were African people doing with their hair? What was their relationship with their hair? How did they think about their hair before Europeans said, we're going to implement our ideas about what hair and beauty is all about? So that's what we wanted to do, is we wanted to really map the journey of black people in their hair from 15th century Africa, from pre-colonial, pre-European contact, if you will. And then what happened when black people were brought to the United States enslaved, and their hairstyles and hair traditions were stripped away, not to mention the very idea of black hair was demonized, criticized, discriminated against as one of the most obvious and oppressive forms of discrimination from day one when they were brought to, when African people were brought to the United States. So that's what we did. We basically charted, African, the relationships black people had with their hair in Africa, and then coming to the United States, being brought to the United States, being enslaved, being discriminated against, and then, of course, post-slavery, the culture that grew around black people and their, as they forged a new identity in this new world, How did the hair cultures and traditions and beliefs change? So that's what Hair Story was. Hair Story, the original version, came out. This is what it looked like. Look at the cover, so cute. Hair Story came out in 2001, and that's what we did. We covered the full history of Black people in their hair from 15th century Africa to about the year 2000. And we talked about the culture, the traditions, the history, but we also talked about the economics of Black hair, the Black hair business, which is a billion-dollar booming business. They say that the Black hair business is recession-proof. So we wanted to dig into that and find out what made it recession-proof. Also, we wanted to find out how the Black hair care business was started by Black entrepreneurs. Even before slavery was abolished, there was a Black hair care business, okay? And it's a business like the funeral business that has been integral to the growth and thriving of the Black community in general. So that explains why when white business owners and bigger business conglomerates started buying up Black hair companies, there was an uproar. There was anger. And this is why we have today organizations that really work to help consumers know what is a Black-owned beauty product, what is a Black-owned hair business, so that they can support companies that traditionally have supported the Black community. All right, so then we wrote this book. Like I said, it came out in 2001. That was 25 years ago, February 2001. And then what happened? The natural hair movement popped off. The internet popped off. That's when you think about that, like the Black hair, the natural hair movement, and the internet kind of blew up together. And so we had to write an updated version of the book, which came out in 2014, right? So 2014 version of Hair Story includes the mapping of the natural hair movement, because that was wild. That was incredible. That was a major shift in how Black people thought about their hair. It was a major shift in how you saw people walking around with Black hair like this. This is a twist out that I've experienced. We even have new words like twist out, braid out, teeny weeny afro, co-washing, right? There became an entirely new vocabulary, traditions, styles, language, jobs, right? I mean, we have hair influencers, about natural hair influencers that did not exist pre let's say 2005. So the second edition of Hair Story talked about the natural hair movement and the ever expanding Black hair care business, which also went wild with the natural hair movement because we got all these new hair products. So that was 12 years ago that book came out. And while I'd like to say that I just retired that part of my life, no, ma'am. I am a bona fide hair historian at this point in my life. The study, the observation, the research, the writing about Black hair culture has continued for these 20 plus years. So yes, I am a hair historian. Yes, I am. Look it up. I am a hair historian, and I, again, have become an expert in all things Black hair history and culture. So here we are today in 2026. Is Black hair still a big deal? Yes. I'm recording this in April, early April, and very recently, the tennis phenom Coco Gauff, let's say she was the target, if you will, of a whole lot of online chatter, a dust up, if you will, because she showed she was in a Miu Miu ad that was more of like a social media campaign, that people thought that the way she showed up in the ad with her natural hair in a bun was not professional enough. People had a lot of things to say. Some people compared her to a civil rights icon. Some people suggested she should have taken more time with her hair and makeup. Regardless of what people said, whether because there was some kind of responses that said that these were not criticisms of her hairstyle. They were just comparisons, again, to somebody apparently compared her to Ruby Bridges, that she looked like a civil rights icon. That wasn't a dig. It was just a comment. Regardless, it caused so much controversy that Coco felt that it was necessary for her to respond to all of the critiques and attacks on her hair. But more than anything, she was saying we all need to just chill out and let people wear their hair however they want to. The point is, the controversy was covered and reported in multiple media outlets. Of course, it was a social media conversation, but when the social media conversations spill out into mainstream media, then we know that black hair is still a big deal in the way that it can command headlines, in the way that it can divide the black hair community, the black community at large, even though I would say that this idea of one kind of groupthink black community is a misnomer anyway. But the point is, we are still arguing about what is acceptable with black hair. We are still arguing what is appropriate for certain people, how they are supposed to wear their hair in certain situations. We are still having you can use different language, but a good hair versus bad hair conversation, whether that good hair is because you have manipulated your natural hair to look a certain way, whether it's because you're wearing wigs or weaves to have a certain look. In other words, we still have not come to homeostasis. We have still not come to an agreement as to whether or not we within the black community ourselves are okay with certain hairstyles. We are okay with what certain hairstyles signify or how we choose to wear our hair in public. The other thing, outside of the black community, we still are seeing women and men being discriminated against at their places of employment. We've seen an example of a woman who was denied service at a blow drying bar that claims to be able to do everybody's hair. She was told that she couldn't get her hair done because they weren't comfortable doing her hair. There's been still I won't say every single day, but continuously, I, as a hair historian, have been reached out to by major news organizations, podcasters, journalists, artists to comment and explain why certain issues are still happening, what certain hairstyles mean. I mean, people have been asking me for a long time now, like, what are freeform locks? What do they mean? Why are certain men wearing them? Hello, Jay-Z, right? So the fact that people still have questions, this fact that there's still misunderstandings, the fact that people are still angry when there are issues of cultural appropriation because non-black people are wearing black hairstyles and black people aren't getting the credit for those styles, and or black people are still being discriminated against for wearing those same styles. We're still having these conversations, people. And in a lot of ways, these conversations are expanding outside of the United States, which is a good thing, because people who have black hair but live under a European aesthetic, in other words, people who are living in Western Europe, for example, people who are living in colonized or formerly colonized countries, this is going to be a conversation no matter where you are as a member of the black diaspora living underneath a European or white supremacist culture. So, yes, black hair is still a big deal. But here's what I would like to do. I would like to reframe what we mean when we say black hair is still a big deal. Because even though we are still seeing examples of hair discrimination, we are still seeing examples of people being shamed for the way they choose to wear their hair, whether it's natural or straightened, relaxed, wearing a wig, we are definitely seeing more freedom. We are definitely living in a world where seeing a woman wearing a natural hairstyle, wearing being bald, seeing men wearing freeform locks, for example, it's not it's not controversial. It's not something that makes people, stop talking and stare, because it has become normalized, the creativity that we now see with Black people's hairstyles. And that's a win. That's a great thing. That means we have progressed since we last showed up with Hair Story, right? So I would like to reframe Black hair being a big deal as Black hair is a big deal because it's so powerful, because it's so beautiful, because it's so malleable that we can change our hairstyles from one day to the next and look like totally different people, that we can use it as a form of artistic and creative expression, expressing our own identity, expressing what's important to us. Black hair is a big deal because we can still use hair grooming rituals, styling rituals to share our family traditions, to connect across generations. We can still go to the Black beauty salon or the Black barber shop and get wisdom from our elders or from our other community members. And that's a big deal. That's pretty freaking amazing when you think about it. So rather than thinking that Black hair is a big deal because people are still getting Twitter shamed, or thinking it's a big deal because, yes, it takes time to do your hair more than your white friend who can just wash and go, I think if we can reframe what a big deal means, then we'll be in a much better position. And I'm going to still keep writing, researching, and talking about Black hair because I think it's a big deal. And I love how our hair does connect us to our ancestral heritage. I love how our hair is available to show who we are in a number of ways. And I love how our Black hair can connect us across cultures. I can meet somebody from another country, but we can bond over our hair stories. And that's a beautiful thing. All right. So I hope I've given you something to think about Black hair. Happy birthday to Hair Story, 25 years old. That makes me feel like an old author, but I'm okay with that. And I'm really excited that you are here listening to me on this channel. And I will be back for the next video talking not about Black hair, not about my nonfiction books, but about my journey to become a full-time novelist. But I will say, you can't forget your past, and I am a hair historian. So in all of my future fiction, check to see what kind of hairstyles my novel characters have, because I always think hair is such a big deal, and how people wear their hair matters, even in my novels. So I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for being here. Bye.